So welcome, everyone. Today's talk is on spiritual chat on death and loss. And today's date is Wednesday, August 17th, 2022. Happy anniversary of the harmonic convergence, for those of you who might not know. So it's a very auspicious date today. So I just want to say up front, there'll be some things that I may share with you that challenge you, those that are online now, or anybody listening to this recording. Just take what resonates, and whatever doesn't resonate, just leave behind. But don't not listen, because if you've been drawn to this recording or to this talk, maybe your loved one wants you to get a message to tell you that they've been trying to show you that they're there and you didn't know it. So I just want to say that up front, because some people will, the minute it starts challenging, they will decide to go off. And maybe there was something there that, because if you just get one thing out of this, then my job is done. I really do believe that. And my intention with doing this talk is for people to receive healing from some loss that they've had. And it's not always through death. It can be divorce, adoption, abortion, any form of loss that they've experienced in their lives. If they can have a greater understanding and shift their perspective around how and why things happened, it will create healing in your body. So I'll be speaking on the extraordinary journey that I embarked on from loss to healing after I lost my husband in December 1987. Where I asked for signs, and then receiving information throughout my life that my husband is indeed still aware of what is going on with me and my son. And then after challenging everything, then getting signs and more signs and more signs, because I never just asked for one. I couldn't possibly explain away all the signs that I got. And I was then convinced that definitely there's more to life and death than how things appear to be on the surface. I share some of my personal experiences and those of others that I've helped and had the privilege of meeting along the way, that of clients that I've helped through the years. I share my understanding and insights that I've gained through death and loss, so that others may move on with their lives after their experience of loss, knowing that all is truly well and that your loved ones are always with you, and that things were exactly what they were supposed to be. So having grown up with my grandmother, who was a student of metaphysics in the 70s, because of her curiosity, I was exposed to information on life after death, reincarnation, near-death experiences, and philosophies that were not mainstream even back then. I had studied all these things extensively as a teenager. I couldn't get enough of reading all these kinds of books. And I even remember seeing a movie that was showing life after death and the different experiences people had, and like a documentary kind of thing, and showing what people's experiences had been and then coming back. And it just always resonated with me, that the story that we've just been given, that, oh, when somebody dies, they're gone, you lose connection with them, you'll never, they go to this place where they'll wait until Judgment Day. It just never, ever made sense to me. I knew there must be more to the whole story, because I believe that God is a God of love. Why would he have one child born in a squatter camp in squalor and another one born in a palace? Why would he create those huge differences in experience? And I just thought the only thing that made sense to me was reincarnation, because then it's through choices that the soul makes for the experiences that they choose to have, for whatever growth the soul wishes to make in the physical plane. So, but when my husband died, so I had been studying and reading all this stuff, and that's one thing. But when my husband died, because he was the first, when my grandfather died, he was much, much older. He was already in his 80s. So it wasn't as big a shock to me, although that was my first experience of death with a family member. But my husband was the first one, and he died when he was 27. And then I thought, hell no, I need proof that all that I believe is true. So I knew from metaphysics that you can receive signs from the universe if you ask for them. And so I asked for signs from my husband. Oh my gosh, I got so many that people started telling me, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. And I said, there are many books out there that I refer people to. I don't need to write a book. And so what ended up happening was I got so much confirmation through the years. And then as I've been in my own private practice for 20 years, and so I always found wherever I was, this was before I went into, before I did any energy healing training or anything, I just found wherever I was, in a cocktail party, whether I went for tea with girlfriends and they brought a new friend along, I just always seemed to attract people who had suffered loss that they'd never dealt with. And so every time I was dealing with a client that was suffering from loss, and I seem to really also have many, many, many of those, I found that I was always giving the same stories. And I thought, what I'm telling them is not just pertaining to them in this moment. This is a universal information. This is universal information that I could share in a much bigger arena if I could. Maybe I do need to write that book. And so I ended up writing the book, Spiritual Chat on Death and the Loss of a Loved One, that I published in August 2016. And it was very interesting because when I was writing the book, my intention was just to give the story at arm's length. I wasn't going to go in deep and go and give the information in the biggest possible way of bearing my soul, being vulnerable. That wasn't the intention. It was just telling it over there. And these are the things, these are the signs you can look for, etc. And then when I actually read the manuscript after I'd finished what I thought how it should be, I then read it from the perspective of a reader. So when I was saying certain things like, oh, if they die in a hospital as opposed to at home, it's meant to be, that all the stuff that I'd written, my reaction as the reader was, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not how it is. And I realized I have to tell my experience, not just give it as a third-party information. And then the writing of the book really began. And then it was really a big journey of healing by sharing all my experience and not just telling it from a distance. So that's what I want to share with you. What I want to share with you now, because you can, when you ask for signs, you can get the signs through dreams, through music, through movies. White butterflies. If you see white butterflies, they always say it's loved ones who have crossed over, who are sharing, or who are letting you know that they're with you at that time. In South Africa, you get a thing called a praying mantis, and the native people of South Africa believe that when you see a praying mantis, it means the grandmother has come to visit you. And I mean, my grandmother, I grew up with her as my mother, so that was my closest human being on the planet at the time. So whenever I see a praying mantis, I know that it's my maternal grandmother because of that. And then my husband was then my next closest. He died first. I always think if my grandmother had died, I don't know what would have happened if she died first. But because of my experience of my husband dying in 1987, then my grandmother died in 1993, I was already prepped for her loss. I was able to, I knew what I knew, not where I believed something and didn't know if it was true. Because of all my experience of my journey with my late husband, I absolutely knew that she was with me, all the signs and all that kind of thing. So because I always feared the loss of my grandmother. I didn't go on school excursions because I was petrified that what if I'm gone and something happened to her, because she had always been sickly with asthma. So I know it was my biggest fear, but because my husband died first, it was almost like there was a buffer before I lost my grandmother. And then things like scents, when you can smell an aftershave or you can smell a perfume or flowers, and it's a smell that makes you think of that person, that's the way they let you know that they are around. when you watch movies or you read a book and there's a one-liner that your family member would have said to you, like if there was a particular thing, like a saying maybe that like in my case, if there was a saying that my grandmother used to say, and then out of the blue in a conversation, somebody happens to say that saying, I know that's her indicating to let me know that she's here. Sorry, my throat's a little bit dry. So they can impress people that are in your surrounds to say something if they feel they're not getting through to you. You know, like there could be days where you've been smelling the perfume every single day and you're still not thinking about the fact that that's your mother or your grandmother letting you know that they're around. Then they've got to find another way to get through to you, you know. And then for me, music has always played a big role. I remember after my husband died, there were so many things that I wanted sounds for. So I remember when when there was a story in the family to do with my husband, that because they were big soccer fans, and so his dad played club soccer, and so when he got his first pair of soccer boots, that he'd slept with them on that the first night. And so I remember when I was driving home, and my son had got his first pair of soccer boots, and I could see his legs sticking out straight. I could see in the corner of my eyes the soccer boots when I was driving the car. And then I was thinking, so do you even know that Clinton now has his first pair of soccer boots? The very next song that came on the radio was our song. So it was just like, oh my gosh, I couldn't ignore that. I remember when we'd gone to, there was a guy that he had gone to school with who was a famous, a really good boxer in South Africa. His name was Brian Baronet. And every time if we went to a wedding, it didn't matter how important the function was, Ian would sneak away into the car and go and listen to the live coverage of the boxing match of this boy. And so Brian Baronet, Ian died December 1987, and I think Brian Baronet died, he took a bad hit in the boxing ring, and I think he had a brain hemorrhage and died. And so this was about the March of 1988. And I was driving in the car, and the news came through to say that he had passed. And so I wanted to know, so you were so obsessed with his whole career. Were you there? Did you meet him when he crossed over? And our song came on straight away. And so I knew, because whenever I drive in a car, always music on the radio. So I got confirmation every time I asked questions, and I would want to know certain things. So music always spoke to me. And then I remember in 1993, I might be jumping ahead, but it doesn't matter. As long as all the information comes out. So there was a weird time where, so he had died in 1987. Then I think it was in 1988 that the movie Ghost came out. I can't remember. And I went to watch the movie Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze. And it was amazing, all the information that I got from there. And then there was another movie that came out called Always by Richard Dreyfuss and Holly Hunter. And that was also about he had died in the movie, and then he came back also. And so I was thinking, every time I heard about that movie, and it was called Always, and our song, mine and my husband's song, was Always. And sorry, I'm talking rubbish. It was a song that he spoke to me with. So I'll go backwards. So he died on the 31st of December, 1987. So on that day, my the friends and everything were around me because he died in the morning. And then it was New Year's Eve that evening. And so they all wanted to go for a drink in order to celebrate his life. And so I really didn't want to go, but they were refusing. They were not going to go without me. So I went with them, and it was at a hotel that we all used to go to that had a disco, and then there was also like a lounge, and so we were sitting in the lounge, and so I know from previous times I've been there that when you went to the bathrooms, there was no sound piped into the bathroom, so you never heard anything in the bathrooms. And so I just needed to get away for a bit. And so I said, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. And I remember going into the bathroom and standing in there, and I could hear music in there. And I thought, well, they didn't have music in here before, but the music, it was like the music was piped into the bathroom. And this song was playing that I didn't know the song. I'd never heard the song before. So because I was just so full of my own thoughts, I wasn't really paying attention to the song. I just noticed that there was a song playing and I could hear it, and I didn't know the song. Eventually, I go back and I join everybody else. Eventually, we go home. The next morning, which was the New Year's Day, my uncle was working on one of his vehicles, and he had to go and buy a part that he needed. So he said, no, everybody get in the car. We're going to go and get it. And they wanted to get me out the house, so they'd come and pick me up. And we'd gone to go to the spare parts place, and it was also part of a petrol station. And so we were parked on one side when he went into this shop to buy whatever the part was. And then this vehicle arrived that was coming to put in fuel. And they had this music on full ball. And so I tuned into the music. And then I said, oh, my gosh, this song was playing last night at the LA Hotel. And I said, it was really weird because the music was in the bathroom, but they've never, ever had music in there before. So my cousin says to me, oh, my goodness, I've got that song. It's a really good song. You need to listen to it. When we get home, I will let you listen to the song. So when we left and we went, they took me to their house. And when I listened to the song, I don't know if you guys know the song Always by Atlantic Starr, but it basically says that, I will love you so for always. We both know that our love will grow. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song. So after that, every time I heard that song, I knew my husband was letting me know that he was there. And so then in 1993, I was now involved. I was involved with somebody else, and who then later became my husband. But we were going caravanning in that December. We were going caravanning to Midmar Dam, and in the beginning of December, the radio station used to have their first launch of new songs, and they would play it on a Sunday morning. And I had been writing out Christmas cards, and the radio was always playing. And I suddenly tuned into the song from the first note. It was like, oh, and it's a song I would never have heard before. And it's the song by Escape Club called I'll Be There. Now, Escape Club, all their music is heavy rock music, but this song, I'll Be There, is an amazing ballad. Now, with this song, it was saying it's clearly being spoken to you from your loved one that's crossed over. And where it's saying, I'll be there on the wind, on the wave, all the songs that I'll be there, I'll be there, I'll be there. And then, so I was tuned into it all the way through, stunned, because it was like my husband was talking to me. My late husband was talking to me. Then we go caravanning to Midmar. And behind us, now bearing in mind, this would be the first time the music would be being launched, kind of thing, played in South Africa. And we set up the caravan, and from the first day, we were there for 10 days. From the first day, every day, about 3-4 times a day, the caravan behind us, the youngsters were playing music, and they were playing the recording of this song, I'll Be There by Escape Club. And I'm thinking, this is just so weird. Why is this song playing over and over again? And why had I heard it that very first time it was being played on radio in South Africa? So then we go home, And we arrive home on the 2nd of January, and the weather is terrible. And my grandmother was staying with me. And so my boyfriend of the time says, look, I'm going to go and hire some movies, and because the weather's so lousy, and then we can watch some DVDs. So he goes off. I've got no input to the movies that he's going to hire. He goes off and gets the movies. He comes back with the movie Always, okay, which is the one with Richard Dreyfuss and Holly Hunter, and the one Fatal Attraction. So we watch and we were watching it in the bedroom because it was freezing cold. So we were watching it in the bedroom on the TV, and we watch Always. And let me tell you, the story in the movie was like my late husband was talking to me. It showed how when music, because this would happen with me. So in the movie, it shows how this guy, Richard Dreyfuss, and his love is Holly Hunter. They work, I think it's in the Canadian mountains, and they are the rescue people for the mountain fires. So she was working in control, and Richard Dreyfuss was one of the helicopter pilots that would fly to drop the water. And so he ends up getting killed in an accident while he's busy working. And when he dies, when he crosses over and he sees the white light, and then he's in this field, and then somebody comes to him and says, listen, before you can move on, you have to help someone learn your skills of the flying. And so then he realizes that he's dead. And so it starts where he goes to the flight school. And so he's giving ideas, and he's talking to this boy, who teaching him what he knows, transmitting the skills that he knew with the flying. And then the boy gets positioned at the same place where he had been. And of course, he gets attracted to Holly Hunter. So, of course, Richard Dreyfuss is not happy with this at all. So he's doing everything he can to interfere. So when they go out for a drink or a cup of coffee, something happens where a comment is made by somebody nearby, or somebody plays music in the jukebox, and it happens to be Holly Hunter and Richard Dreyfuss's song. So it kind of derails the connection between her and this other guy, and then she feels upset and she wants to go home. Or she invites him around for dinner, and then he decides to play some music, and he fast forward the tape, and then Richard Dreyfuss is saying, go, 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 stop. And as he pushes stop and he pushes play, it turns out it's hers and Richard Dreyfuss's song. So it shows all the ways that he tries to derail the relationship between between Holly Hunter and this other guy. And then there's also a part where she goes to sleep at night and she's really upset, and how he lies with her all night, holding her. And that used to happen to me quite often, where I'd wake up in the morning feeling like he had held me all night. And in this movie, that's what it showed. It showed that Richard Dreyfuss lay with her all night, and how she woke up in the morning actually feeling him. And then there'd be times that she would be very heart sore, and she'd feel like he was there watching her. And in the movie, it's depicted in that way. So I knew that through the movie, he was giving me confirmation of all the times that I thought he was there. So it was showing me through the music, showing me through how he was kind of playing the role of interrupting things between Kevin and I. And so right at the end of the movie, and through the movie, I'm howling. Obviously, Kevin was not aware of what was going on. He knew I cried in movies, but this was sobbing. I mean, it was ridiculous, but clearly he didn't register what was happening because he just wasn't aware. And then right at the end of the movie, something happens where she's underwater. So I don't know if she's in an accident or whatever, she's underwater, and while she is underwater, she sees him. And in the communication, he says to her that it's time for me to now move on. I can't believe I still get emotional about it. So she was just, he was letting her know that it was done. He's no longer interfering. He wishes her all the happiness, and that he's now moving on to leave her to now live her life. And I knew that that's what Ian was letting me know, that it was time for me to get on, and he wished me all the happiness. Because I was torn with the relationship, about getting married and all that kind of stuff, because it felt like, was I betraying? Was there anything that I shouldn't be doing? And it felt like he was giving me the okay. Sorry for being emotional, but I didn't think talking about it. I mean, I've written the book and everything. Surely by now I wouldn't still get emotional about it. But that movie was really special. Now, I've seen that movie maybe 4 or 5 times since then. It doesn't have the same impact. So I know that day that I watched it was very significant, and that it was being communicated by him to me through the movie. And note that movie, that song had been playing all the time those 10 days before that, that I'll be there. So I mustn't worry, because no matter what happens, he will always be there. And so when my first granddaughter was born in 2014, I was so emotional, because my grandmother had passed in 1993. And so this was the first grandchild, or the great grandchild. And so I wanted to know, do you know that for Ian, I wanted to know, do you know our baby has had a baby? And I was very emotional. And so when I got home, I had put, there was some of the Long Island Medium episodes that I hadn't watched in the series. And so I just thought, I'm going to listen to one of those. And I want to tell you that your loved ones, and John Edwards also says this, that very often your loved ones will piggyback on a story of someone else's reading. And the girl from Long Island Medium says the same thing, Teresa Caputo. She says the same thing, that even though she may be doing a reading for one person, if the story resonates with you, the fact that it even gets your attention in that way, your loved one is letting you know that the same information. And so I put on this episode, and so my husband had died in 1987, and this is 2014. My son was 2 years old when my husband died. And so here is this 28-year-old, and my son, I think, was 28 at the time when my granddaughter was born. And this guy was 28 years old. He was having a reading with her, and his father came through, who had died when this boy was 2 years old. So that got my attention immediately. And he said, and I want you to know that through all the years, I've known everything that's gone on in your life. Every step of the way, I've known everything. I was there with the birth of your children, because this guy had 3 children. He said, I was there with the birth of your children. I held your children I held those souls before they came through to you. Needless to say, I was howling again, because I'm a good crier, a bit of an ugly crier, but that's the only way. I can't help it. But I got confirmation from Ian all those years later, because now he died in 1987, and here in 2014, I was still able to receive confirmation that he was around and knowing exactly what was going on to do with Clinton, even though it was all these years later. So know that you can ask them for signs, and they can come to you through movies, through music, through something somebody says, just once you've asked for the signs, just pay attention to what happens. And it can come in the most unlikely ways. Some people could say, Allison, that's a little bit far-fetched. I mean, that thing was recorded, and it was a recording of a recording. So you had, because it was pay-per-view TV. So I had stored it as something that I would watch at a later stage. So they could say, well, it was so disconnected. How can you say those two things? Well, I don't believe in coincidence. You explain to me how it's possible that everything was so parallel and answering exactly what I asked. The fact that that child was that boy was the same age as my son, and he was 2 years old when his dad died, and then his father comes through and gives him the whole story. So if you think you can explain that away, I'm happy for you. I know, and I'm the world's biggest skeptic, so I do not just try and pull the things together to make it work. It's got to be in your face, absolutely no way that I can explain it away for me to believe that is a sign for me. So I just wanted to share that part with you. If I noticed with my grandmother, she used to wear white linen, the Estee Lauder white linen perfume. And if there was something where I was missing her, or I wanted to know if she was around, I would happen to go to a shopping center and stand in a queue or something where the lady next to me is wearing white linen. So there's just, I actually haven't asked for a sign in a very long time, and I haven't smelt the perfume in a very long time. So that's quite interesting. So that tells me that it's not a coincidence when that actually happens. Okay, so there are also other things that I know for sure. No one dies before their time. With the experience with my late husband, it was ridiculous the way circumstances stacked up in such a way that the way the accident happened, it happened to be a work accident, and all the crazy anomalies that happened that led to it. So, for example, he worked for the electricity department for the municipality. So they were putting on a brand new substation. They were commissioning a new substation, and he was in the new substation. The senior foreman was in the old substation. Okay, that was being switched over, and so for some reason the senior foreman's radio was not working. So because where Ian was, they had the old crank mag phone where he could communicate with the control through that way. He gave his radio to the senior foreman to use, okay, because there was still a three-way they could work where he could get the information through the mag phone from the control to say he's giving the all clear, and for the other foreman to be able to receive the information through the radio, because there was no phone at that old substation. So they had thought that nobody knew there was a really bad earth on the line. Now that's where you get that, so you can't hear clearly. They thought he had given the all clear, when clearly he must have said not clear, because he went straight back into the equipment, and the control had given the all clear to the senior foreman, and he switched the equipment on, and he became the arc to earth. Okay. And so he got severe burns and ended up in the hospital, in the burns unit in the hospital, which happened to be the best burns unit in the country. So he would have been getting the best treatment, and then survived for 17 days, which has me now thinking that's a bit of too much of a coincidence. But anyway, he survived for 17 days because his accident was on the 14th of December, and he died on the 31st of December from the complications of kidney failure that happens when you get burns to that extent. Now, the weirdest thing was, he had only just got the promotion in the August to assistant foreman. The youngest person who had got that position ever in the Durban Corporation. He had applied the previous 3 years for that position. And each time the engineers had said, no, you're too young, no, you're too young, no, you're too young. And then decided to give him the position then. So, but he was the youngest by 10 years. He had just that year taken the exams, the highest safety level of exams that you could get in South Africa for his job. If he worked with electricity in the house at home, he wore the same gloves that he would wear in a substation. So he was the most cautious person in regarding that kind of thing. So the thing that made me wonder afterwards was, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did a part of him know that electricity would be the cause of his death? Or some people say if you're overcautious or you fear something, he was just respectful of electricity. Or did it happen because he was so cautious? I believe that unconsciously what the way your death is going to be, the way you're going to check out here. There's no ways you don't know that information because it's programmed in your DNA. So I do not believe that it was his over cautiousness with electricity that was the cause of him dying through an electricity accident. I believe that he knew on an unconscious level. And the psychic medium that I went to actually said that they know 3 years before the time, that when the time is going to be that they die, on an unconscious level, not on a conscious level, which is quite interesting because we had got married in 1984 and my son was born in 1985. So we got married March 1984. We had our son in December 1985. I always wanted 2 children. And but when I had my son, I was adamant, hell no, I'm not having another baby. And he was like, but you said that we'd have, no, I'm not having another baby. And so it was a little bit of a bone of contention about the fact that I did not want to have another child. And it was interesting when I went to the psychic medium, because the psychic medium said to me, he wants you to know how grateful he is that you were so adamant not to have a second child, because the hardest thing for him to let go was letting go of my son, of not being there for my son. So all those kind of things I'm sharing that with you because sometimes we think our instinct is, damn, if I knew I should have had a second baby. You know, you can turn that instinct in the opposite direction and then have regret associated with that. Whereas I have no regret about that because I just know that that's how it should have been. I wouldn't have had that instinct if it was not the right thing, you know? And so the timing of all of that is, I mean, I was told by senior foremen who were mad about that the accident happened at all, because they said, and by the way, no accident had ever happened on the watch of that senior foreman, and no accident had ever happened on the watch of that guy that was in control and that worked in the control room. And other foreman had said that should never have gone ahead, because the rule is if anything doesn't work smoothly, the whole thing must be aborted instantly, because it means that the thing is not flowing for the commissioning of a particular thing, that job is meant to be on hold until the things are ironed out. And so the minute the senior foreman's radio wasn't working, they should have postponed that the whole thing that they did, which they didn't do. So I could be all bitter and twisted about the fact, well, it's their fault, it shouldn't have been done in that way, but I didn't. I just knew nobody dies before their time. With all the studying that I'd done of life after death and all that kind of stuff, I knew nobody dies before their time, because what is a near-death experience? They almost die, and then they're told, no, it's not your time. You have to go back. So I knew that it had to be his right time for him to go. I also was very aware of the fact that if we were meant to die together, then we would have had a car accident together. So clearly I was not meant to die at the same time, which means I still had to get on with life. And of course, with having my son, I was responsible to make sure that I pulled myself together to be strong for him. So, and many people get lost. They die on some level when they lose their spouse because they think that they can't carry on when they are meant to carry on. And unfortunately, very often what happens is the children of those of that kind of scenario, they don't just lose the one parent, they end up losing both, because the surviving parent will end up being emotionally unavailable because they're not dealing with their grief. And that's why it's so important for people to deal with their grief. And it's the same if parents lose a child. Very often they grieve in different ways. I mean, I've got a friend of mine who's one of my closest friends. They lost their son the beginning of this year. In fact, the anniversary is 6 months tomorrow. And I know they are both grieving in completely different ways. And I know that people find it difficult to understand each other, how the partner is grieving. So it can look like the one partner doesn't care because they internalize everything, and the other partner is thinking, why don't you pull yourself together, because you can't carry on like that. In the meantime, they're each grieving in different ways, and so it comes out in different ways. And they only had one child. But sometimes you get where with younger children passing, and the parents don't know how to console each other. And so they are grieving the loss of the child, and that ends up tearing them apart. And then you've got the other siblings. If there are siblings, you've got siblings that are that lose both parents because the parents don't know how to deal with the grief, so they pull back. And on an unconscious level, what the parents don't even realize is happening, because the subconscious mind is there for our survival. It's like, I don't ever want to go through that again. So it pulls back and disconnects from the children that are still living, because if one of them died, they don't ever want to go through that pain again. So it ends up this terrible confusion of trauma, and nobody knows how to deal with the loss. So that's why, to me, I'm jumping ahead because there's still more I want to share, but to me, the greatest gift anybody can have is to be able to go to a psychic medium. To me, the best medium there is a psychic medium, but you have to make sure it's the one that I see dead people. You got to make sure, because there are plenty of scam artists out there. I've been to many because I recommended psychic mediums to my clients, or to friends that I would meet, or people who had lost loved ones before I had my practice. I would recommend them to go to a psychic medium, because it was a psychic medium that helped me answer all the questions of beforehand and what happened at the time. And when I moved down to Cape Town, I was no longer connected with the woman in Durban, and she'd retired by then. I'll tell that story later on. But and then I went to psychic mediums in Cape Town because I wanted to make sure that they could service my clients properly. Every one of them that I went to, and some of them are pretty famous in Cape Town, well known, and they didn't even tell me that I'd lost my husband. So there's a difference between a psychic who's just picking up information, and a psychic medium who actually I see dead people, that they can actually see the lost loved one and be able to communicate from them. So it's really important. Don't expect to get a psychic medium reading from just a psychic that gives psychic readings as in future or what's going on with you right now. So there's a distinct difference between them. But it helps you deal with all the different things of why things happened as they did, what happened leading up to that, all that kind of stuff, so that there's no answers that are, no questions that are unanswered, and no confusion. It gives you so much confirmation that I promise you, your life will be completely different in relation to the loss moving forward. The other thing I know for sure, wait, I still want to go on with the no one dies before their time. So, no, that will come under another section. So the other thing is that they do not experience the impact of a violent death. Because if they're meant to die, the soul actually leaves the body before anything happens. They don't feel any pain, regardless of how violent the death appears. So there's a wonderful book. It used to be called On the Death of My Son by Jasper Swain. And then it was the name was changed to The Gift. And I had read this book years ago, before I even met Ian. And it's the story of this Peter Maritzburg boy. So Peter Maritzburg was an hour out of Durban. I grew up in Durban in South Africa, excuse me. And they had gone up to Kyalami as a racetrack in Johannesburg. And his family had gone up there. They were going to go and watch the race. It was car racing track, and he had gone up in his Mini, and his folks were in their sedan. So he was driving in the Mini, and his girlfriend was with him. And so it's about an 8-hour drive back then. It would have been about an 8-hour drive up there and then back. So on the way back, his girlfriend said, "Oh, she's feeling cramped. She wants to swap, and she's going to drive. So maybe it was with her folks. So she swapped with her sister. Her sister was 13 years old, and she swapped with her sister, and she drove in the car with her folks, and they were driving in the Mini, him and his girlfriend's sister. So as they were driving along the road, a car overtook another car coming towards them. And he could see that they were going to have the accident, okay? The next thing, he's aware that he's out of his body, looking down, and he sees, like he's dreaming, and he sees that there's this huge accident, and he thinks he's dreaming, okay? And the 13-year-old, they're holding hands, and they're looking down, seeing the whole accident, and they're wondering what's going on because they think they're dreaming. So they move closer to go and see what's happened. And then they see their bodies in the car, and they realize that they had been in the accident. Okay, that they died in the accident. They were not in there when the impact happened. Okay, so the story goes in this book where the accident had happened. These are big churchgoers. The father is a deacon in the church. They don't believe in any woo-woo. They don't believe in life after death and all that kind of stuff. They go according to what the Bible says and what the church says with all that kind of stuff. So there was no availability for anything like that. They were totally traumatized by the loss. So the psychic medium who lived down the south coast of in the same region in KwaZulu-Natal, the same state, what you guys would call a state, she starts making phone calls and leaving messages for the dad to get hold of her because she has a message from the son. And of course, the father and the family are irritated by this woman, saying she's taking advantage of their loss. And so no matter how many messages she leaves, they ignore it, they ignore it, they ignore it. Then the one day, the dad is lying in bed in the morning, and his son appears to him at the bottom of the bed. And he said, "Dad, I need you to go and see that woman now." So I think the woman had given the address or whatever. So he gets in the car and he just drives down to where the address is down the south coast. And as he drives in the driveway, the husband of the psychic medium says, "Hi, are you so-and-so? We've been expecting you." So the son had already told the medium that the dad was on his way. And then, of course, the dad is very reserved because why he's not sure. He thinks they might have pulled some weird magic or something, because he spun out, because even the son appearing shouldn't be how things are, not the way the church had the way he knew things to be. So she starts giving him information, and he's listening, but he's thinking there must be a way that she must have got it. She couldn't possibly know. And then she called him by the name that only him and Mike knew. Nobody else in the family knew this nickname that they had for each other or whatever. And the minute she said that, the dad knew for real that it was Mike. And so he then explained everything that had happened to do with the accident. He told him how he wasn't in the car and that it was the right time. He told him the work that he's now doing on the other side, helping with him and the girl, that they were doing work to help souls that had overdosed, to help youngsters that had overdosed, to be able to help them go into convalescence and stuff, because it's a shock death. And explained everything, and then explained a whole lot of stuff of how things are on the other side. So anybody who thinks about reading this book, I highly recommend you read it, because it also gives a whole lot of other amazing information. And so I had read this book, and I'm sitting in the lounge, and my uncle is outside. Now, my uncle was very psychic, but I know he didn't read, because he was he might have been dyslexic, I don't know, but he had difficulty reading. So I know for a fact he had never read that book, so he wouldn't even know the title of the book. So I'm sitting in the lounge. So this would have been probably a few days after Ian had died. And he comes from outside, and he comes in and he says to me, "You need to read that book again on the death of my son." So I look and I say, "How do you know the book?" He said, "No, you must have spoken about it." I said, "No, how do you know the book? I don't think I've ever given you a title of a book, because you're not interested in books." So he said, "Well, Ian told me that I need to tell you that you need to read the book." So I go read the book again. And then I realize that about the psychic medium in the book. And I thought, now this book was written in 1968. And this is now 1988, because this is the January of 1988. And I'm thinking, but I don't know how old she was then. Could she be dead? I mean, I have no idea. So I get a bee in my bonnet, and I'm thinking I'm going to try and track this woman down. I know she's down the South Coast. And coincidentally, I am working in Telcom, in the telecommunications thing, the telephone department. And I deal with extreme North and South Coast records. I'm in charge of that section. Now, I was very black and white. No, the thing must be done properly. I've always been that way. I's must be dotted and T's must be crossed. So there would be certain telephone numbers that would be unlisted. So for everybody that's unlisted, you can't just think that you should get priority because of who you are or what your position is. So I knew that the number was not in the telephone directory. So I phoned the lady, who was a really grumpy old lady that was in charge of the section that was in charge of South Coast, extreme South Coast. And so I called her and I say to her, "Daphne," and now everybody knew that I'd lost my husband. So I said, "Daphne, I'm trying to get hold of this woman. I'm trying to find out, is she still down the South Coast? What is the story? What is I'm trying to get hold of it. I know the number would be is unlisted, because I've tried to look. So do you know of this woman?" And she said, "Hell yes, everybody down here knows about her, and her number is unlisted, but her son's number is not." And she gives me her son's number. So I phone the son. The wife answers, and the wife says to me, "Oh no, I'll give you her number." And she gives me the number. I speak to the maid. The maid says, "Oh no, the madam's at work in Durban." And I then phone her, and she says, "Yes." She said, "You can come and see me now." She was literally 2 blocks away from me in the city. where I worked, in the building that I worked in, she was 2 blocks away from me. Just rewind a little bit because I forgot the first part. Jasper Swain was he was a judge. And so their judge offices, their center was in Durban. So I thought, well, if I phone the rooms, they're not going to give me the number for the judge, but I can ask if he's still alive. Because at this point, I don't know who's still alive. So I phone and I say, is Judge Jasper Swain still there? And he said, oh, yes, but he's sick at the moment. So he's at home, but I'll give you his number. They gave me a judge's number, home number. I mean, what are the chances of that happening? They don't do that. I mean, they don't know who I am or what I was looking for him for. And then I phoned and I spoke to, I got hold of the wife, and I told her my situation, and she said, oh, yes. No, she's still alive. She was 28 at the time when Mark died. So she would have been 48 at this time. And she said, oh, no, as far as I know, we lost contact with her, but she's still down the South Coast as far as we know. And I asked her, so do you still speak to Mark? And she said, no, not all the time. You'll see. When everything is put to rest, you'll understand. And this woman was so at peace. And I was thinking, how could she be at such peace when she had lost her son? But I know that when all the information is explained, there's no longer the need for the grief and the regret and the guilt of all the things you could have or should have and might have done and didn't do or should have done or shouldn't have done. And that's what does your head in. So I highly recommend getting hold of a psychic medium. And also in that book and a lot of the other books that I've read where there was impact of any kind, there was no experience of that. And I've also found that people who have had an accident, there's a friend of mine who saw the white light, a girl that I worked with. She had an accident. She didn't believe in any of this kind of stuff. She was walking across the road. She looked and she saw this car coming and she realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to get knocked over. She was not in her body at the time of the impact. She doesn't remember getting knocked over. Had the whole experience of the white light, was told she had to come back. When she came back into her body, she was already in the ambulance. So you can imagine how long that period of time would have been. When they were working on her, the ambulance still had to arrive, and then she was in the ambulance at the time when she re-entered her body. So I know over and over and over with personal stories as well as things that I've studied and read and accounts of people that had near-death experience, they never experienced the full impact. So even if they died, I don't care how horrific the death would have been. If they were shot up, whatever the case may be, they were not in the body at that time. And I think that the way they die has got nothing to do with them passing. It's the impact with the people left behind, the lessons that the people left behind have to learn through whatever that experience is. And then the other thing is that in some cases, there's a bigger, higher purpose in relation to the death. So someone who dies, like I know, and I only found out years and years and years later, with what had happened with my husband, they ended up changing the type of clothing that they would wear when they would work in the equipment thereafter. So they would have to wear like fireproof overalls, whereas before it was just a normal overall. So it had to be fireproof overalls, etc. And then my cousin went to a lecture because he's an electrical engineer. He went to some lecture that was giving information about stuff. And then they actually used my husband's accident as an example of a certain thing and said what we learned from that experience was, so his story is even down in the lecture books or whatever that they use in the lectures that they use now for people regarding safety in situations like that. So it's almost like his accident wasn't for naught. It was for them to take action to have people more secure and safe in similar kind of situations. Then I think of the Amy B story. I can't remember if I told that story just in general on a chat the other day or whether it's on any other recording. But if I think of her dying, now Amy Beale, if you don't know the story, she was an exchange student in South Africa, in Cape Town, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who had come here and was helping in one of the townships here, one of the black townships. And so you've got a lot of street children or, orphans because of AIDS, etc. And so this boy had seen this girl catching a taxi. They use what they call a minibus taxi. Saw this girl coming into his area, his home area. And he thought, well, he's grown up, because in South Africa, they taught that blacks hate the whites and want to kill them. And then they taught the blacks that the whites hate them and want to kill them. So this young boy took a look at this girl and thought, well, before she can do anything to any of my people, I'm going to kill her. So his motivation was to protect his people. And so it was all over the news. I imagine it was all over world news because it was a horrific thing that had happened. And her parents came out to South Africa to come and meet the people, whatever the case may be. And the mother decided she was going to help in that township to help those street children. Now, the father clearly could not forgive what happened. It was too much grief for him. He died within 3 years of lung cancer. Now, lungs are it's in the heart chakra area, your energy center of the heart, and that's relating to bereavement and grief and loss that you're unable to deal with. And so obviously he was unable to deal with the loss, but the mother still works, as far as I know, in the townships here. Now, if any other white person here wanted to go in there and help the people, the people would be on guard because they don't trust that. It's been inbred in them that they mustn't trust white people. But because the woman was there and one of their people had killed the child, and they knew that what good work the child had been doing there. When I say child, I think she was 18 or 19. They wanted to make it up to the mother. So they were happy to let her into their space, into their community. And I remember watching the Carte Blanche show when where they told the story, because I didn't really know the story being in Durban. And they were doing an interview with the mom and with the boy that had killed the daughter. And here he was telling the story that's how I know the story of what he was thinking, because he told the story. And he said, so I was saving my people because I didn't know what she was doing there. We just were told that you got to watch out for white people. And so, and he said, and the shock when the mother came to see me in prison and wanted to know why did I do it? And then she became my mother. So the woman took him on and treated him like a son. So when you get those kind of stories, there's a whole nother level of healing. And I have no doubt that woman is a master. To be able to overcome that and want to make a difference, that's huge as a soul for her to be able to do something like that. She is no mere human being. She is much, much bigger than just an ordinary mom coming and wanting to make a difference, to be able to forgive at that level. So that's an amazing story. Then we've got other stories, like I think about there was a girl in South Africa that was sick and she needed a liver transplant. And I know that story was around the world, because I think they actually were asking around the world. There was a whole, what do you call it, campaign to try and find a liver for this child. And eventually the child died. So the mourning would have been much bigger because it touched a bigger arena of people. And then maybe other people deciding they want to go and register for to be able to donate body parts if someone is, to become a donor, to be able to save somebody else's life. So we don't know what the soul contracts are in relation to all of us that come here and what impact we're going to have. If it's going to be something small where someone just dies of a heart attack quietly and they're old anyway, so it's no big shock. One mourns the death, but it's no big shock because it's what's expected. Whereas I know when Ian died, people suddenly started thinking about life is too short. You need to embrace life in the biggest possible way because you never know when it's your time. Then you've got others who, if the person dies of a heart attack, say, then they will suddenly think, if it's a young person, then they will think that they've got to watch their own health because if a young person could die of a heart attack, they could too. And then they start getting their act together. And that would all be a soul contract according to the people that are surrounding them, their lives that are impacted and affected. And then also, some people die at home and some people die in the hospital. So I know my grandmother had been in and out of hospital because she suffered from angina. And so that would always can present looking like it's a heart attack. And so she'd end up in hospital, but she didn't like hospitals. So when she died, I was with her. She was in my home when she died. But she called me in the room, and then she told me that she was having an angina attack. And so she had her tablet under her tongue. And then she said to me, well, one of the things that happened, because you need to know the story, she said, she started, because she always used to do this, I need to tell you about my burial policy, and I need to tell you about this. And I would, because she was asthmatic, I would always say to her, please just save your breath. It's fine. Don't try and tell me. But she said, I need to tell you this. And so I would always say to her, no. You need to save your breath. You need to save your breath. So this time she said to me, I need some ice cream. If you can just get me some ice cream. And I went into the kitchen to get her some ice cream because she said it'll be better if she has something cold. When I came back, she was gone. And I had learned when I worked in telecom, I was the first aid officer on my floor in my section. So I had learned how to do resuscitation and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't as if I could think if only I knew how to do first aid, maybe I could have saved her life. No, I did all the stuff, but she was gone. When I spoke to her cardiologist, he said this is the one that would have taken her even if she was in ICU in the hospital. So don't think that there was anything you could have done that would have been different. So I was given peace of mind with that. And so then I was full of the grief of, oh my gosh, I should have let her talk because now I don't know what she wanted to tell me. And I had phoned the psychic medium later that day because this happened early hours of the morning. And when I spoke to her later that day to tell her that my mom, I called her my mom all my life because I grew up with her as my mother, not my grandmother. I only found out when I was 19 that she was my grandmother. And to me, she was still my mother. So when I told her that she had passed, and I said to her, but oh my God, this time I didn't let her speak. I should have let her speak because now I'll never get to hear what she wanted to say. And she said to me that my granddad said, no, don't worry about it. She wouldn't have had the breath to tell you all that she wants to tell you. She will find a way. And it was about 2 days later, I think, one of her friends phoned me to give condolences. And then she said, do you know, I had a conversation with her, a long conversation with her a couple of months back. And she told me this is what she told me. And she went on and on for maybe an hour or two, telling me everything that my gran had told her, of all the stuff that I had done for her, all the stuff that she was grateful for, and all the things. And then I was thinking, why is this woman telling me all of this stuff? And I realized that's what my gran would have wanted me to know. And there's no way she would have been able to tell me at the time. It was impossible. But that was already set up. That's why I want you to know everything is kind of set up beforehand, which is so weird. That woman was able to tell me everything that my gran would have wanted to say to me. She was able to tell me because my gran had told her all of that. So I was still able to hear what my gran wanted to let me know. And then others will die in a hospital. So, I wanted, with the story to do with my gran, attached to that story is also, she didn't want to die in front of me. So I'd been with her the whole time. Then she sent me out the room in order for me to get ice cream, okay? So when I came back, it had already happened. So the same thing had happened with my late husband. I had been called in on the morning, early hours of the morning, where they'd said to me that he'd gone into kidney failure and that they thought this was the end. I need to come in. So when they a burns patient, they have to keep the temperature in the room hot. So they have heaters on throughout the room, okay? And this is peak summertime. But if I had been in that place every single day from the time of the accident, from early in the morning until late at night, I was there every single day. My gran was taking care of my son. And so I would then go home at around about 5, 6 o'clock. But I would be there first thing in the morning. And never, ever once did I feel like I needed to be out the room. This day, I was in there, and then all of a sudden, I kept on feeling like, because they were working with them all the time, I felt like I could faint. And eventually, I thought, they can't deal with both of us. I cannot faint. Yeah. So I said, look, I'm just going to go out and sit by the sitting room. I'm feeling a little bit faint. I'm feeling very hot. And they said, no, that's fine. You can go. And so I went and I sat in the waiting room. As I walked in, I looked up, and the time was 6:15 a.m. The clock was on exactly 6:15. And so now I'm doing everything to fan myself, to try and cool myself down so I can get back in there. And I was still feeling faint. Eventually, it was at 6:30 when somebody came into the room and they said, we just want to let you know he's gone. And I said, what time? 6:17. They said, we've been trying to resuscitate him since then. So he clearly did not want me in the room at the time. And the psychic medium actually confirmed that. She said, I see that you weren't there at the time. And I said, no. And I told her what happened. And she said, no, he didn't want you to be there when he took his last breath. So that, me being overwhelmed with the heat and all that, was deliberately in order to get me out the room. So, and so she was even able to tell that, she said, it's interesting because normally the soul leaves through the chest, and it shows that it left through the foot, like he had exited through the top of the foot. And I said, well, the whole body was burned except for his feet where he had his safety boots on. And she said, oh, that explains it. So that's how much detail a psychic medium can give you. So I wanted to say, because some people I know, I've had clients of mine where they're absolutely devastated, where they've had this vigil at their mother's side, either at home or in hospital, where they've been there the whole time, where family members would swap over or whatever, and then they just suddenly think, I'm just going to quickly go to the bathroom, I'm just quickly going to go and grab a cup of coffee, and at that moment the parent passes, and then they feel guilty that they weren't there. Okay, you weren't meant to be there, otherwise you would have been, because then there are the other stories where the person should have been dead, but they've been hanging on, and then the family member that's had to come from overseas or whatever the case may be arrives and sees them, and at that moment they pass while they're all in the room, or after seeing them, and then the family go home to sleep and will come back the next morning, and then they're gone. And then they think, but we should have been there. No, it was exactly the way it was supposed to be. If you were meant to be in the room and with them, you would have been. If you were not meant to be, no wild horses would have had you in the room at the time. Because my choice would have been to be with Ian at the time or with my gran at the time. But their agenda was different. They did not want me in the room. They probably knew that the trauma of that would be far greater for me to handle. And so it was taken out of my hands the way that it unfolded. So you've got to trust it always is exactly the way it was supposed to be. I just want to read something quickly out of my book. I'm just going to push pause while I find the spot quickly. I'm just going to read this section because I just think it's concise enough. Whereas it's like I get more downloads as I'm talking. Very often when someone close to us dies, there's a huge mix of emotions from grief, guilt, sadness to anger. You didn't ask me if I was okay with you leaving or if I would cope without you, even though something like that may be illogical. So even though you may not be aware of it on a conscious level, that is what your body is saying. So if you were there at the time, then you feel that you should have done something to prevent it. And if you weren't there, then you are torn apart by the guilt that you should have been. If you were in the accident with them and you survived, then you wish that you had died instead of them. So you got the survivor's guilt. And if they died on a trip that you had encouraged them to go on, even though they were reluctant to go, then you have the guilt of having sent them to their death. And so this is what I got. The truth is, if you were meant to be there, you would have been. If you were meant to die with them, you would have. If you were meant to die instead of them, you would have. If you were meant to help them avoid it, you would have. If you were meant to prevent it, you would have. No one dies before their time, so the timing is always perfect. And then this had come to me one morning, the day before. No, it was later that day. No, it was a Friday morning, and I woke up and decided that I need to start writing some stuff down. And so I started writing, and then this just flowed through me. Oh, no, it was the part that I've just read. Sorry, it was the part that I've just read. And then I had a friend of mine phone me the next day to tell me that her son had just been killed in a hit-and-run accident in France, and they were meant to leave that afternoon for the other son's wedding in France. So that son had come across to France from the States, and so the family were all getting together for the son that was getting married in France, who lived in France. And so she was absolutely devastated because they'd got the phone call 5 o'clock that morning to say that the hit and run had happened the night before. Because he was a foreigner, they had to find him. So what had happened was that her ex-husband had gone ahead. And so the father and the two sons had gone out the night before, that night, the Friday night, to have a drink together. And then they were on their way back to wherever they were staying. And the younger son said, no, I want to explore a little bit more. I want to have a look around. So they went home, and then, but the son never came. He had been knocked over, but because he was not, he didn't have stuff on him, they had to go through the passport office and all that kind of stuff to try and find out who this person was and be able to find out where they were staying, to contact the next of kin, that you give on your information when you get your visa. And that's why they only got the information so late. And so she was so upset. So I said to her, oh my goodness, this is what I got yesterday. And then I've read what I've just read to you. And so I said to her, let me type this up quickly and I will give it to you so you can take it with you. And then as I was typing the information up, when I'd finished typing it up for her, this is what came through. And I might get a bit emotional when I'm reading this, because I knew this was the message to her. So if a loved one who has passed speak to you one more time, they would probably say, I'm sorry that I had to do this to you and cause you so much pain, but it was my time to go, and I am really fine now. Don't forget me. Talk about me often, as this brings me close to you. I am just a thought away. In the silence, you will feel me and hear me. Still do the things we used to do whilst thinking of me, and I will be there. Don't feel bad about the things we should have or should not have said or done, because it all looks okay from where I am, as it was exactly how it was supposed to be. The love and bond we shared never dies and will go on for always. I love you. So I just wanted to read that part in association with what I just read about the fact of the timing and all that kind of stuff, so that you've got that. I may post just those two little sections on the wall afterwards. So regrets and guilt are the worst things that we can do for ourselves, as this stops them from, it stops us from letting the grief go, and it stops them from being able to connect with us. Because when you are locked in grief, your energy is very dense. So they are unable to communicate with you. Otherwise, they would let you know if something was going on. And or when if you want confirmation that they know that something's going on, they can't do it because you are so dense in the grief. Okay. And I know I'm not trying to make light of the grief. Okay. I'm not trying to say, get over yourself. Because some people will say to me, oh, well, you've got this all sorted, so obviously you don't feel the grief. Hell yes. I get mad. I get mad at them. I get mad at God. I get mad at everybody. But then when I've calmed down, I then get it in perspective of, okay, this and this and this and this. So I know about this for sure. I know about that for sure. And then I can deal with the grief in a way that is not where I'm shut down, where I can't get the signs from them. And then there were also, like the psychic had told me, that they know unconsciously for up to 3 years before the time that they're going to pass. And so everything kind of unfolds beforehand as it's supposed to, leading up to that point. And if I think about it, we had bought a new house. We had bought a new house, our first house, in the February of 1987. And so in the December, because December was when you would get that's when we got out the bonus. In the November, you get your Christmas bonus. And so there were things that we could have done for the house, like buy new curtains and stuff like that. And then that's also the time where they go into shutdown, where the everything closes down between Christmas and New Year. So there's a shutdown period. And so that's the time where you would want to do stuff on the house or whatever. So I kept on saying to you, we should get curtains and we should do this and do that. And he kept on saying, let's leave it till the new year. Let's leave it to the new year. So no matter what I suggested, he was saying, let's leave it to the new year, which was so crazy. And then the psychic medium said to me, well, when he was saying leave the things to the new year, it was because he knew he couldn't start anything new when he wasn't going to be here in the new year. So anything that you did would have been filled with grief and a reminder of the fact that he wasn't there. So it was not a time for new beginnings. It was a time for ending. So I know that if any of you look back to see certain things leading up to the passing of the person, you will be able to put certain things in place. I remember this one woman, I think the daughter was 10 years old, and she was a swimmer, and a strong swimmer. And she'd gone on holiday with family friends up to Namibia. and they'd gone swimming in the river, and she got washed away. I mean, she was missing for a week. Now, they knew that she was a strong swimmer, but the current was obviously too strong. Eventually, they found the body. But the mother kind of had a different take on it, because she just thought, if she was such a strong swimmer, why did she go into the water? She would have been aware of the fact that the current was too strong and all that kind of stuff. So she was just questioning a whole lot of things of, why did this have to happen in this way? In the meantime, the family that she went with were absolutely destroyed that this could happen while she was with them. I mean, everybody was really broken by the whole thing. So when the mother came to me, it was a year later. It had happened the previous July. And when she had come to me, I asked her certain questions like, was there any indicator beforehand? And she said, well, there were strange things where she said, if anything ever happened to me, I want my cousin to have all my clothes. And I want my cousin to have this and have that. And if anything ever happened to me, she said she was kind of speaking like that, which was really weird. And I never questioned it at the time. And she said, so when it happened, I then thought, did she know beforehand? Why was she saying things like that? So I said she would have known unconsciously beforehand. So we were able to put a whole lot of things in perspective to show that it wasn't just a fluke thing. It all unfolded exactly the way it was supposed to be. I remember a friend of mine whose dad died in the dentist chair. And I still said to her, obviously he didn't want to die at home, because then the mother would have been absolutely devastated. Then they wouldn't have wanted to be in the house, because instead of the house being a happy memory, it would have been a sad memory, because her husband had died there. But he had gone to the dentist that morning and had a massive heart attack in the dentist chair and died. And I still said to her, well, obviously he didn't want the memory of the home to have of his death, so that his wife would not grieve in such a huge way. So when you look back, you'll be able to see how things unfolded in a particular way that was leading up to it. But they wouldn't know consciously. They would just be behaving on an unconscious level. Like my grand telling that friend that whole story after the phone call, she probably would have thought, why did she tell the friend all that stuff, But thank goodness there's a higher level of stuff that's at work. Okay, so I wanted to also speak on divorce. So when I got the title of the book to call it Spiritual Chat on Death and the Loss of a Loved One, and I do conscious channeling, so I hear my guide speaking to me, and I thought, why would it be death and the loss of a loved one? Isn't that what death is? Only as I started writing, I realized, there's death. Divorce is like a death. That's a loss. Adoption, abortion, miscarriage, when somebody dies through suicide or illness or accident, all those experiences are experienced by the individual who's left behind or having the experience as a death. Because the way the understanding of the body works is anything that is new is traumatic. So if someone moves houses, if someone changes jobs, if someone changes relationships, anything like a divorce, the body reads it, oh my God, this must be death, because life as I know it is never going to be the same again. And so from that perspective, doesn't understand what's going on. It gets really desperate. And so it's still experienced like a death, even though it was just a loss. I remember, because I got divorced in 2009, and I remembered what had happened just after my husband died. There were a couple of older women who were divorcees that I worked with. They were in their 50s. And I remember the one woman saying to me, you don't know how lucky you are that if he's going to leave you, that he died, and it wasn't divorce. And I said, what? She said, well, you know that he still loved you. You know, he didn't choose to leave you. Whereas with divorce, they don't love you, and that you then have to come to terms with the fact that you see them with another partner. And I could not understand that these people could say this. I mean, I was just like, how could they be so insensitive? But when I got divorced, I realized that pain is actually worse than a pain of death, because death is, you know why they've left you. You know what it's about. They didn't choose to leave you. They still love you, you know, and I understood what she meant because of the pain that's associated with divorce. And then I also didn't understand, why is there pain with divorce? Why would there be that level of pain, for goodness sake, if you know that the relationship is not working? And then I realized the one day, it's the loss of the dream. So you're literally mourning the loss of the dream. So each time things weren't going well, you think, no, but we're going to get there. No, we're going to get there. And eventually you realize it's just not going to get there. So when you are suffering the grief of the loss, when you're going through the grief with divorce, very often it's the grief of the loss of the dream, besides the natural loss of what's happening. But that kind of makes it far more amplified than it should be. And then you've got adoption. Okay, so now you have someone who has someone that's given somebody up for adoption, or they've had an abortion, either their own choice or it was a forced termination on some level, and then they are now forced, and they are hating and judging themselves for what they did back then. And it's like, you cannot judge the 14 or 16-year-old you for decisions that were made that were out of your control. At the time, you thought that was the only option. But the trauma related to that is really difficult to let go. And I truly believe, because I know there were some people that tried to abort a baby, but guess what? There was nothing that could make that abortion happen. That baby still came through. And then there's another situation where a person just hiccuped or sneezed and they lost the baby. Very often a baby can choose to abort because the circumstances, the soul can choose to abort of its own, that's for miscarriage, because the circumstances that it was coming into are different to what was originally planned. So there can be some change in the dynamic of when it was coming, what the family situation that it would come into, and it can choose, no, I'll come back later. Because if that soul is connected to those parents, it can choose to come back in another way, at another time. Okay. Then there can also be where the baby only needed to come in to have so many months in the tummy for what it needed for physical experience. Maybe it wanted to check things out before it chooses to come through at a later time, and then can choose to leave. And that's how a miscarriage can happen. Okay. So there's a lot of grief around that, but there's always a higher perspective of why things happened as they do. And the only thing that makes sense would be soul contracts. So everybody involved and affected in that scenario all agreed to what the lessons were that would be learned through the experience that they all agreed to be part of. And then with adoption, the soul that chooses to be adopted, because believe it or not, the soul would have already agreed to having that experience before it came through. So I'm going to use my example. Okay. So because I had just on Friday, on the 12th of August, I got my results from a DNA kit, and my brother gifted that to me. So I wouldn't have because I had this all so well in perspective, I wouldn't have chose to go and have I wouldn't have chosen to go and have the DNA test done, to have to check the ancestral stuff, because I had it pretty right in my head. if I was meant, and I still believe this, if my father was meant to be in my life, he would have been. If he was meant to be a part of my life, he would have been. If he was meant to play any role in my life, he would have been there. Clearly, I was meant to come through my mother, and there was no emotional connection between my mother and I, the biological mother. There was a total, absolute connection between my grandmother and I. She was my first master as far as the spirituality was concerned, but the bond was unshakable. So I know that with my biological mother, the only way I could get to my grandmother was being born to my mother. And back in 1961, what they used to do is the illegitimate child of the wayward teenager my mother was 16 when she fell pregnant. She was 17 when she had me. That child would just become part of the family as a sibling. And so the grandmother would be the mother and the mother would be the sister. Apparently that happened quite a lot in the 1960s. Anyway, so I wasn't hung up about the fact that I didn't know who my father was, where my brother was really like, how can you not want to know? And I said, because I don't need to know. And my brother, they grew up in a very born-again Christian household. So my brother doesn't believe in all the stuff that I believe in. And I really wish that he was open to it, because I could heal so many things for him that he grieves of experiences and stuff that he's had. But anyway, I just love him anyway, and he loves me regardless. I think they told me the one time they pray for me to be saved every night. So God bless them for the fact that they do that. But I don't hold it against them that they don't accept what I do, because we each have our own journey to walk. But our bond and our love is very big, because we only really connected as adults and not we didn't get a chance as children. So he gives me this gift. I have the test done, and with no real intention of following anything through or whatever. And all of a sudden I find I've got a first cousin that's in Johannesburg, and then find out that I'm Portuguese, which I didn't know. My father was Portuguese, and we don't have all the details yet, but I suspect that he was born in Madeira, and all of his father and the father's siblings were all born in Madeira. Okay, so now I was thinking, why would I need to know this information now? Oh, and it was discovered that he died when he was 31 in 1975. I would have been 14. And let me tell you, knowing the type of person that I am and how deeply I feel lost, if I had been with my father and he had then died at 31, I would have been absolutely devastated. I would never have been able to function after that, knowing who I am. So he was going to die anyway. He was going to be gone. So he never got married, and he never had children. So and he never knew that I existed. So I know I was supposed to get his genetics. And I was kind of forewarned, because years back a psychic had told me that my father wasn't here, that my father had passed. And that I had the reason why I had chosen him as my father was because I needed the genetics, part of my spirituality through that gene pool as well, besides on my grandmother's side. And so now, all these years later, when I'm 61, I'm for some reason now connecting with those genetics, with that family. And I know for some reason, somebody there I need to connect with. Maybe I'm meant to help them with the work that I do. I don't know what the answers are, but I absolutely know that I was never meant to connect with them before now. Now is the divine timing in order for me to do that. I still don't know what it's about or why, but I also have to tell you that knowing the lineage has made me feel whole. And I know that sounds crazy. I feel like I'm a bit in an altered state. I know there's also lots of stuff happening energetically on the planet, but I keep on saying I feel whole. Who would have thought that just having the knowledge of where I come from would make me feel whole, especially when I have all the understanding that most people don't have, of understanding about that if he was meant to be in my life, he would have. If he no wild horses would have kept him away, that I chose it exactly the way it was. Most people don't know that that is the case. And that's why I want to share this. It gives you so much peace. It stops you from being resentful to the parents if they gave you up for adoption, or if they didn't want anything to do with you. Whatever the choices are, it was all agreed with before we all came here. We said these are the roles we'd play, and how it would be played out. So if someone is given up for adoption, and I know there was one boy that my son went to school with who knew from, I think his parents always told him he was adopted. I think he always knew, but he couldn't get past the fact. He just was always reactive because he couldn't get past the fact that he was different, that his parents didn't want him, and that he was adopted. And yet he had wonderful parents who absolutely loved him, but he couldn't get past the fact that his parents didn't want him. And it's quite interesting a lot of the time when people are older and more mature, they come to realize those aren't the choices that were made. Very often, the mother made the choice to give the child up for adoption because she truly believed that the child would have a better chance in life, a better understanding of how life works, being more supported, maybe the financial support, whereas maybe that the mother was single and poor, or whatever the case may be. You don't know what circumstances she was in. So sometimes they only realize when they're mature adults, but as teenagers, they may be reactive or whatever, or if they find out later on. So in some cases, those adopted children may search for their parents and then discover that the parents had died. Well, then you weren't meant to connect with them, but maybe you were meant to connect with the family. So in some cases, they do connect with the family later on, and then the bond is so strong because they're trying to make up for all the lost years in between. And it doesn't matter how old you are, 50, 60, 70, that connection is still really, really, really strong. And if it was meant to happen in that way to heal the wounds relating to the being adopted or being separated from the parents, it will happen, because you cannot miss the bus. You cannot miss the bus in relation to what experiences you were meant to have in this life. So however it's panned out up to this point, if you then decide now and you start getting the inclination of, well, maybe I should do that DNA testing and see where I come from. Who knows what's supposed to happen with that? Because when you hear the story behind it, it may heal things that you never even knew were an issue for you, and it may heal stuff that where you are having problems in relationships now. It could be directly related to the fact that you think you weren't good enough for your parents to keep you, your biological parents, and so you don't think you're good enough for any relationship now. So it may heal stuff when you find out, actually, no, they were both truly in love, but they were too young and they didn't know what to do. And so this is why they took the steps that they did. Somebody will always know the story, and it doesn't matter how old you are. You're going to find someone who knows the story somewhere about it. So if you were meant to connect with them later, you would have. A story I just want to also tell is, so my second husband, he was unable to have kids. When we eventually got married, he adopted my son. We got married in 1996, and he adopted my son. If you saw them today, you would not believe that they are not blood. That's how strong their connection is. And so if there was going to be a surrogate father, because Ian was not going to be here from 2 years on, then there couldn't have been a better surrogate father than Kevin, because he completely took him as his own. And it was quite interesting because Clinton is like a mini me of Ian. He's a spitting image. Ian and I were often mistaken as brother and sister because we looked a lot alike. So people that know Ian know that Clinton looks like him. Although a lot of people that know me think he looks like me, but I know he's more like Ian. And so people would see us and then they would say, oh my gosh, he looks just like Ian. And he used to say, I wish they wouldn't say that, because I just want to know that I look like Dad, because now he had taken Kevin on as his dad. And I said to my boy, the point is that Ian was your father. There's nothing that you can take away from that. But he used to feel like if he acknowledged that, then that could create distance between him and Kevin, that was not how it would have worked. But when he had his child, and I had told him, Ian was besotted with you for those 2 years. I said the psychic medium even said the hardest part of him letting go was letting go of you, not me, you. And when he had his first child, the one day he said to me, Mom, I now understand what you meant when you told me that about Ian, because that's how I feel about Rachel. So isn't that interesting how it came full circle, and then it could heal all the stuff that he felt where he was worried if he created a connection between him and Ian that it would separate him and Kevin. Meantime, those are completely different dynamics. So I just want to say, wow, it's gone on for 2 hours. So I better round up so we can get some questions. So I just want to say the ways of dealing and healing the loss. I highly recommend that you see a psychic medium. Make sure that it is someone that is highly recommended to you, who people have had the experience of them, so they can put to rest all the concerns of why things happened as they did beforehand, leading up to the death, and then all the information relating to that. Because sometimes people don't want to make a decision about something, and I don't know if he'd want me to sell the house. And when they're on the other side, they're not worried about how and the way you do things and the way you conduct your life. They're okay with everything that you choose. They would support anything for you to move forward in your life, including a new partner, because you were not supposed to stop your whole life at the point of their death, at the point of the loss. And then the other thing is energy healing is a really powerful tool for clearing grief and emotional shock and trauma from the body in relation to anything like the death or divorce, adoption, abortion, every one of those things. I have worked specifically with clients of mine in relation to those things, because all those traumas leave an energetic charge in your energy field. If you can clear the charge that can be triggered when you think about those things, then you put yourself into a clearer space where those kind of things are no longer a trigger for you. You can think about those things in a different way. It doesn't stop you missing the person. So even though I've had the healing relating to all of that, you can see that there's still some stuff that I get emotional about, because I'm still in a heart space about it. But I don't feel the grief, the absolute wrenching loss. It just is a heartfelt memory and recall in relation to that. So I feel the love, not the grief in relation to that. So I think I've covered everything. So are there any questions relating to that?